Hollowshade wasn't marked on modern maps. In fact, Ellie only learned of it from a dusty envelope left in a locked drawer of her childhood home. The envelope contained the will of her uncle, Alexander Wren, an animator who vanished 10 years ago without a trace. No one ever found a body. No obituary, just rumors. And now his estate was hers. To my niece Eleanor Wren, I leave the house in Hollowshade, burn nothing, finish what I could not. That final line stuck with her. It was handwritten beneath the legal text, ink smudged like it had been written in haste or fear. As Ellie drove deeper into rural obscurity, cell service died, and the air took on a thick, silent weight. The sky had dulled to a permanent overcast, casting everything in a lifeless gray. Trees flanked the narrow road like skeletal guardians. Branches arched overhead, twisted unnaturally, clawing at the windshield as the wind stirred. The town itself appeared without fanfare, just a hand-painted wooden sign cracked in the middle leaning on rusted bolts. Welcome to Hollowshade. Population? The streets were abandoned, not in a ghost town way, but as if everyone had gone inside at once and never came out. Shops stood shuttered. Toys lay scattered on a playground covered in moss. A slow creak echoed as an empty swing shifted in the breeze. Even the birds didn't sing here. Ellie arrived at the house around dusk. It loomed at the end of a cul-de-sac like something ripped from a Gothic sketchbook. 3 stories tall, with rotting wood siding, turret windows, and a warped roofline, the home gave off an undeniable sense of dread. The front door opened with a groan that sounded eerily like a sigh. Inside, the air was thick with age. Dust floated like ash. The wooden floor owned beneath her boots as she explored. She passed rooms covered in tarps, hallways filled with framed sketches of surreal creatures, faces too long, eyes too wide, limbs bent backward. At the top of a narrow staircase, she found her uncle's studio. The walls were lined with shelves, canisters of film, animation cells, jars of ink both black and unnaturally red. A rusted animation desk sat at the center, still holding reels, blotting paper, and yellowed sketchbooks. On the desk was a flipbook, thick with age. No title, no name. As she opened it, a tingle ran down her spine. The first few pages were simple, a flickering candle, drawn in precise, looping motion. But the candle seemed to flicker differently with each pass. Its flame leaned toward her, grew teeth, then shifted back. Page after page, the drawings grew darker, shadows creeping in, forming clawed hands. When she reached the final page, her heart froze. A face stared back at her. Hollow eyes, grinning mouth stitched shut. It blinked. Ellie threw the flipbook onto the desk and staggered backward. She stared at the room, now darker than before. The air had thickened. She could hear a low hum, like static crackling between the walls. She stepped closer, breath held. The flipbook was now open to a blank page. But in the corner, someone had drawn an eye, and it was watching her. Ellie didn't sleep that first night. She tried, laying on the dusty mattress in what must have been her uncle's bedroom, but every creak of the house sounded deliberate, like footsteps pacing above her. When she closed her eyes, the blinking face from the flipbook flashed in her mind again and again, its stitched smile pulsing as if trying to speak through the paper. At 3:12 a.m., she gave up and returned to the studio. The air in the room felt heavier than before, pressurized, like something was waiting for her. She flicked on the desk lamp. The flipbook was exactly where she'd left it, but now an entire new series of pages had appeared at the back. That hadn't been there before. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The new pages showed a little girl standing in the very studio she was now in. Drawn in charcoal, the character moved across the frames, turning, glancing over her shoulder. On the 5th frame, a second figure appeared behind her. Tall, black, shapeless, its arms too long and fingers needle-thin. The girl turned again. The thing was closer. The final frame showed the girl screaming, her mouth frozen wide, her eyes dripping ink. Ellie dropped the book. A breeze swept across the room, though no window was open. The light flickered once, twice, and then held. Something had changed. Drawn to the back shelves, Ellie began sifting through boxes labeled in her uncle's handwriting. Inks. Real A, do not screen. Eyes. One unlabeled box held a collection of old sketchbooks. Some were normal, character sheets, unfinished concepts, but one was clearly different. The pages were glossy like preserved parchment, and every illustration moved, subtly, like breathing. She stared at one, a half-finished drawing of a man with his mouth sewn shut, arms tied behind his back. His eyes followed her. The next page had a cat-like creature with no skin, slinking across a black background. She flipped faster. Each creature was more grotesque than the last. One of them, an eyeless marionette, twitched. She snapped the book closed, heart hammering in her chest. She needed answers. Ellie opened her uncle's desk drawers. Beneath old pens and ink bottles, she found a thick leather journal. On the first page was a warning. The pencil is not a tool, it's a key. Once you draw, you invite them. And then, only animate with the black ink. Anything else, they won't stay on the page. Suddenly, the studio door creaked behind her. Ellie turned, slowly. No one there. But on the wall, scratched into the wallpaper with what looked like a claw, were words she hadn't seen before. You've already started the reel. Ellie stared at the words carved into the wall. You've already started the reel. The scratch marks were deep, as if someone or something had pressed with inhuman force. She backed away slowly, clutching the leather journal against her chest like a shield. The air had changed again, thicker, wet almost, like breathing through syrup. Her hands trembled as she returned to the desk. She didn't want to touch the flipbook again, but something about it pulled at her curiosity. She was an animator too, trained in digital and traditional work. She'd grown up idolizing her uncle's strange stylized films. Now, she was wondering if the rumors surrounding his final project were more than myth. She flipped to the first page again. The candle was still there, but this time, the flame swayed violently, almost panicking. On page 3, the shadows grew longer. Page 5, the candle flickered out, and 2 glowing white eyes appeared in the darkness. Then the pages changed. She hadn't drawn anything, but the images told a story. The ink moved on its own. A little girl, again, possibly herself, was now running down the hallways of the house. Her expression was one of sheer terror. From behind her, shadows spilled like ink across the frame, chasing her from page to page. On the final frame, the girl stopped. Something hovered behind her, its hands stretching forward, about to grab her shoulders. And then, nothing. The page went black. And then, slowly, new lines began to appear. Fresh ink. Right before Ellie's eyes, a message formed in handwritten strokes. Look under the floor. Ellie dropped the flipbook and staggered backward. She was alone in the studio, but she felt watched, surrounded. A scratching sound began beneath her feet. Faint at first, then more insistent. Skack, skack. As if claws were dragging through the wood from beneath. With shaking hands, she grabbed a crowbar from the tools cabinet in the corner. She stared at the floorboards beneath the desk. The scratching had stopped. Carefully, she wedged the crowbar under a loose board and pried it up. Beneath it was a hidden compartment, and inside, wrapped in cloth, was a rusted metal canister. A film reel. Its label had rotted away, but carved into the lid were the words. Ellie held the reel in both hands, her fingers trembling. The metal was unnaturally cold, despite the warmth in the room. It pulsed faintly in her grip, like a living thing. She turned it over slowly. No sprocket damage, no signs of degradation. but something about it felt sentient. She placed it carefully on the desk and backed away, heart pounding in her chest. That night, Hollowshade was quieter than usual, like the whole town was holding its breath. Ellie tried sleeping again, but the darkness inside the house pressed against her like a heavy blanket. Every time she shut her eyes, she saw ink bleeding down the walls, faces without features leering from corners, and static humming in the distance. At 2:43 a.m., she woke to a thud in the hallway. She sat up, clutching the covers. Another thud. Then the sound of dragging. Slow. Wet. Deliberate. Ellie grabbed her flashlight and opened the bedroom door. The hallway was empty, except for inky black footprints leading down the stairs. They were small at first, then suddenly, much larger. Her breath caught. She followed, flashlight trembling in her grip, down to the studio. The door was wide open. Inside, the flipbook was moving, its pages flipping by themselves, faster and faster. Ink sprayed outward from it like smoke. The images became violent. Distorted faces, gaping mouths, screaming figures. Each page bled into the next like a fevered dream. The old film projector in the corner of the room, long unplugged, clicked to life on its own. The reel Ellie had found was now loaded, though she had never touched it. The projector whirred. The screen lit up, and the room changed. The walls rippled as if breathing. The ceiling dripped black ink. From the corners of the room, animated creatures began to emerge. Half-finished sketches, twisted outlines, inhuman forms. One looked like a skinned deer with human eyes. Another, a marionette with a twisted spine, crawling upside down. Ellie backed away, gasping. The screen flashed, showing the inside of the house. In real time, watching herself from another angle. Then a figure entered the frame. Behind her, she spun around, nothing. She turned back, and the screen now showed her lying in bed, sleeping. But she hadn't gone to bed, she was still awake. And then she understood, the animation wasn't showing the past or the future, it was creating it. Ellie slammed the projector off, but the images didn't stop. The reel continued spinning, casting flickering shadows of moving ink across the walls. She yanked the plug from the socket. Still it spun, as if the power came from elsewhere. Only when she covered the lens with a thick black cloth did the hallucinations, or whatever they were, fade back into the room's dim silence. Panting, Ellie collapsed in the corner of the studio. Her heart was racing, but her mind was spinning faster. She needed answers. The town, the house, her uncle. None of this was random. She retrieved the journal again and flipped toward the back. Tucked inside was a brittle envelope labeled Property of Hollowshade Historical Society. Inside, she found a stack of yellowed clippings, photographs, and typed transcripts, all detailing the early days of the town. The deeper she read, the more disturbed she became. Hollowshade had once been an artist colony in the 1920s, founded by a man named Malachi Soot, a surrealist obsessed with bringing imagination to life. He believed animation was more than movement, it was resurrection. His group, the Ink Circle, developed an experimental medium, black ink mixed with powdered bone, animal remains, and something else. Locals called it living ink. Rumors spread quickly that films made by the Ink Circle could hypnotize viewers, that their sketches moved without film, that a secret project, Reel 13, was so horrifying, so cursed, the entire town revolted against the artists. They burned the original theater to the ground. The artists were run out or vanished, all except one, Alexander Wren, her uncle. The town turned quiet after that. People stopped coming. Some said Hollowshade made visitors forget they were ever there. Others said the town was stuck inside its own film. No one could prove anything. Ellie stared at an old photograph included in the envelope. It showed a group of men and women standing outside the animation house. At the center, holding a real canister, was her uncle. Standing next to him was a tall, faceless figure. Its outline wasn't drawn. It was inked directly onto the photograph, and its hand rested on her uncle's shoulder. Ellie couldn't breathe. The faceless figure in the photograph seemed to stare at her, despite having no eyes. Its silhouette was darker than the paper itself, as if the ink had eaten through the image. And its fingers, long and sharp, rested possessively on her uncle's shoulder, like it had claimed him. She tucked the photo away, unable to look at it any longer. Her thoughts turned to the reel. The cursed canister still resting on the desk, humming faintly like a low growl. It hadn't spun since she covered the projector, but the air around it pulsed like heat mirage. Ellie made a choice she already knew she'd regret. She took the reel downstairs to the basement. The stairs groaned beneath her feet. The air grew colder with each step, and the further she descended, the more distorted the world became. The basement wasn't just a room. It felt like stepping into a forgotten part of time. Strips of old film lined the walls like wallpaper. Ink stains marked the floor like blood splatter. At the far end, a rusted projector screen hung from chains, surrounded by film cans stacked like gravestones. A single spotlight flickered overhead. She loaded the reel. The moment the gears clicked, the film began to roll. The first image was of a child's bedroom, animated in black and white. The walls pulsed, melting in time with a distorted lullaby playing backwards. A creature crawled out from beneath the bed, impossibly tall, legs bending the wrong way. It opened its mouth and no sound came. But Ellie felt something tear in her chest, as though the scream was inside her now. Then the screen changed, to her house, to this very basement, to her. She stood on screen, exactly as she was now, facing the projector. Then, in the frame, a hand reached out from the darkness behind her. Ellie spun. Nothing. Back to the screen. Now her animated self turned around too, mimicking her. But something was different. The eyes. Her eyes. They were all black, and her mouth was moving, no sound, just the eerie movement of lips, over and over, like a loop. She mouthed the same words endlessly. Let it out. Let it out. Let it out. Suddenly, the reel snapped and whipped violently out of the projector, flinging itself across the room like a serpent. The basement lights blew out one by one, and in the darkness, something whispered from the walls. Ellie bolted up the stairs, the shadows clawing at her heels. But something was wrong. The hallway at the top of the steps wasn't the same one she'd descended from. The walls now curved slightly inward, like a fisheye lens. The floorboards beneath her feet stretched and flexed unnaturally, as though the house itself were breathing. The wallpaper peeled away in animated loops, first curling, then resetting in reverse, again and again. Her heart pounded as she stumbled forward. She wasn't in her world anymore. She was inside the film. Portraits along the hallway walls turned their heads as she passed. The eyes blinked, some inhuman, some hollow. The door to her uncle's studio loomed ahead, but as she reached for it, it slid upward like a cartoon frame and vanished into the ceiling. A hallway of black void lay ahead. She turned to run back, only to find the staircase behind her had dissolved into a flat, two-dimensional backdrop. Drawn, not real. No, 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 she whispered. A familiar voice echoed from the void. Her uncle's voice. You shouldn't have watched it, Ellie. It came from everywhere and nowhere. The walls pulsed again, then peeled open like paper curtains, revealing a massive theater with rows of inky, faceless spectators, silent and unmoving. She stood center stage. A spotlight hit her like a hammer, and a grainy film countdown ticked behind her. 3, 2, 1. Then came the music. A grotesque version of a cartoon theme, played on off-key calliopes and screeching violins. The audience began to twitch, their outlines squirming like unfinished sketches. Ellie turned, and standing behind her was the director. A monstrous figure made entirely of dripping ink, with film reels for eyes and jagged, flickering teeth. Its limbs unraveled and reformed constantly, shifting between animator and animation. "You started the reel?" it said in a voice layered with hundreds of others. "Now you must finish it." It reached toward her with one melting hand. Ellie ran, through doorways that looped, through rooms drawn in chalk, past staircases that led into themselves, gravity bent, time warped. Her body flickered between full color and black and white. She realized she was becoming animated. Her fingers jittered, her shadow outlined in pencil strokes. Her breath came out in stuttering frames. She saw her reflection in a cracked mirror. Wide-eyed, half-rendered, she screamed. And the scream echoed like a soundbite being rewound. Ellie's world trembled between two realities, one foot in the living house, the other slipping into the animated nightmare. The director's inky fingers stretched closer with every heartbeat, threatening to consume her flesh and soul. Desperate, Ellie recalled her uncle's journal, buried deep in her backpack. Frantically flipping pages, she found detailed sketches of a ritual. A circle drawn in black ink, sacred symbols etched around it, and instructions scrawled in trembling handwriting. "Only by completing the animation can you trap the evil back inside the reel," the note read. "Draw with the black ink. Draw with intent. Draw to bind." The ritual was her only hope. Ellie found a broken quill on the floor and dipped it into a jar labeled "Black Ink, Keep Sealed." The ink was thick and cold, almost alive. It pulsed under the quill's tip like a heartbeat. Kneeling on the studio floor, Ellie drew a perfect circle. As the line completed, the air thickened, shimmering with dark energy. Her hands trembled as she traced symbols, triangles, spirals, jagged stars. The ink absorbed into the wood, burning with an eerie glow. Suddenly, the room warped. Shadows danced at the edge of her vision, animated creatures from the flipbook, the reel, and the journal. They slithered, crawled, and lunged, trying to break the circle's boundary. Ellie kept drawing. The creatures screamed in silent agony, dissolving into puddles of black ink when they crossed the circle's edge. But the strongest of them, the director, banged against the barrier, its voice a twisted cacophony. "You cannot bind what already breathes." Ellie's breath hitched as her vision blurred. The ink on the floor began to rise like smoke, forming glowing chains that wrapped around the studio, pulling the darkness back toward the reel. With a final stroke, Ellie signed the last frame, the final binding. The circle pulsed once, then exploded in a flash of white light, silence. When the light faded, the reel lay still and cold. The studio was quiet, normal. The animated horrors were gone. Ellie slumped back, exhausted but alive. But on the desk, the flipbook lay open, and on the last page, a new drawing. Ellie, smiling, eyes black as ink. Ellie's breath came in ragged gasps as she stared at the flipbook's final page. Her own image grinned back at her, eyes hollow and black like spilled ink. The smile was too wide, too unnatural, and something about it chilled her deeper than the shadows ever had. She tried to close the book, to end the nightmare once and for all, but the pages stuck as if fused by unseen glue. The room pulsed again, and the walls seemed to ripple like waves on ink-stained water. A whisper floated through the air, barely audible but unmistakable. "Finish me." Ellie's hand trembled as it reached toward the page. She tried to resist, but her fingers moved on their own, guided by a force older and darker than fear itself. She gripped a charcoal pencil left on the desk and hesitated over the blank space beneath her drawn image. Her uncle's journal lay open nearby, filled with warnings, but the urge was too strong. The pencil scratched against the paper, drawing slowly, deliberately. With each stroke, her world changed. The shadows around her thickened and shifted. the air growing heavy with ink and silence. Her reflection in the window no longer mimicked her movements. It smiled with a sinister curl. The figure in the drawing took shape, dark and twisting, no longer her image, but a monstrous parody, a shadow self coming to life. Suddenly, the house shook violently, as if the very foundations screamed. The reel on the desk began spinning again, faster and faster, projecting swirling images onto the walls, flickering frames of horror and despair. Ellie tried to pull back, but the pencil wouldn't stop. Her limbs stiffened, her vision blurred. She felt herself slipping, becoming part of the animation, trapped forever within the cursed story she tried to end. Then, silence. Ellie opened her eyes to find herself inside the flipbook, a two-dimensional prison where each page was a cage. Behind her, the ink creatures circled, waiting for their next prey. The last thing she heard was her own voice, echoed in the ink darkness. "Finish me." The screen fades to black. A soft, childlike giggle breaks the silence. The camera slowly pans over a quiet suburban yard on a crisp autumn afternoon. A small girl, maybe 7 or 8, clutches a worn flipbook tightly in her hands. The cover is blank, just like the one Ellie found. She sits cross-legged beneath a towering oak tree, flipping through the pages with innocent curiosity. As she flips, the drawings begin to move, tiny shadows darting between the frames. The girl's eyes widen with wonder. Then, on the final page, the image forms, an eerie, smiling face with hollow black eyes. It blinks. Suddenly, the wind stirs, swirling fallen leaves into a dark vortex around her. The girl looks up, smiling wider than seems possible, her eyes shifting to pure black ink. The screen glitches briefly. The girl's voice, now layered and distorted, whispers horror. If you want to watch more horror movies like this, please like and comment on the video. You must subscribe to our channel and keep the bell icon all press. Thank you.